We're going to continue talking about the different types of educational philosophies. In our last video, we looked at the four main branches of philosophy and kind of talked about those in a little bit of detail. And again, I told you that I'm not a philosopher. That philosophy is not my area of expertise. And I know enough to be able to talk about the educational philosophy with you. And so, what I want us to get into are the four main types of educational philosophy. The first type is what we know as perennialism. Now, perennialism is very subject centered. This is going to be a person that views nature and especially human nature as being constant and unchanging. Basically, with the mindset of people are always like they've been, and they're not changing. And there's some value in that thought, because if you look at old writings, you see a lot of the same issues that you see today. For example, if you were to read in the Bible about the in the before Christ era, when the Israelites were roaming the land and in captivity and all these things, you see a lot of things that God talked about as being sinful. And it's a lot of the same stuff that people do today. And so the nature of people doesn't really seem to change a whole lot. And so from an educational standpoint, the perennialist feels like the purpose of life is to search for that constant, changeless truth. Okay, and again, philosophy oftentimes will go kind of in a religious stance or direction, and we're not doing that. We're focused on the educational part of this. And so, education to the perennialist develops mental discipline needed to be able to search for eternal truths. And so, the curriculum is going to be based on timeless classics such as the great books, things from Western culture. This is going to be real famous works of literature, for example. Those are going to be the types of things that the perennialist wants to use in their classroom. And so the idea is that this person is going to use the past to teach the present. Okay? The perennialists insist that education is preparation for life, and therefore believe that it should not attempt to imitate life or be lifelike. So, again, focusing on that preparation for life, being prepared when you go out into the real world. And so, the perennialists are really going to focus on the just that search for truth, and teaching from the standpoint of, well, what we've always done has worked, and so we're going to continue just to use the same things that we've always used. I'm going to give you information. You're going to get that information. This is going to help you lead a successful life, help you figure out for yourself what truth is, and some of those things. And so the perennialist is going to be very, very subject focused, but more on using the classical literature and things of that sort to teach. So, any kind of writings, the Iliad, for example, would be a classic that perennialists a lot of times would want to use. Again, I'm not a literature major, and so to be able to just spout off a bunch of literature they might use is not really my area. But I can tell you that the perennialist is really going to focus on using works that are considered to be great books, the Iliad being one of those. Okay? And so, as you're thinking about the perennialist, that's really the focus, is using old content to teach what you need to know to be able to live that life that's in search of truth. Now, the next one is what we call essentialism. And this is really what the name says. This person is someone that is, again, very subject focused, and they're going to focus on what they deem to be essential for a productive life. It's going to be focused on getting information from the teacher. The teacher has the information, basically gives it to the student. The student then takes that and is able to go from there and live this productive life, if you will. Essentialists are going to view the mind as the central element of reality. Everything happens within the mind, and so learning is going to happen through contact with the physical world and reasoning from observations. Again, a very logical, focused mentality of, okay, everything's going to happen within our minds, but our goal is to be able to get essential knowledge to live a productive life. So the curriculum is based on a core of essential knowledge. That's going to be things like your reading, your writing, your mathematics. Those are going to be really the main focuses for the essentialism philosophy. So some of the goals on page 287 in our book, it talks about for the essentialists, the aim of education is to teach youth the essentials they need to live well in the modern world. To realize this goal, schools should focus on the established disciplines, such as the containers, quote unquote, of organized knowledge, as captured in the educational slogan, "Back to the Basics." Elementary schools years ago would concentrate on what they called the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. Okay, now arithmetic doesn't start with an R, but they called it the 3 R's, and that was the focus, is reading, writing, and arithmetic, and even sometimes tied into that, religion. And so as we think about this essentialism view, it is focused on the teacher giving knowledge, that knowledge being the basic core subjects. And then the essentialists would look at things like science and history and things of that sort as being kind of offshoots of one of those 3, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Okay? And so everything is kind of based in this person's mind as there's basic things you need to know. If you know these things, you can live a productive life. The next one is the Romanticism. Now, this gets into a philosophy that is very child-focused. It is very student-centered. It is really known as naturalism, and it's based on the idea that if the student is able to decide what they want to study and can kind of lead the way, then education happens easier than it would if the teacher is saying, okay, here's what you're going to learn whether you like it or not. And there's some benefit to that. Okay? This Romanticism, excuse me, the nature and human nature are preferable, to the evils of organized society. And so this person is going to want to really move away from what the essentialism would think of, okay, here's your basic things you need to know, and more opens up the philosophy of, well, let's let the kid decide what they want to learn. They feel like the needs and interests of individual students are more important than those of society. In other words, if a student says, well, I want to learn about, pick a topic, the teacher says, okay, let's learn about that. And so the teacher, lets the student kind of guide where the class goes. There's some issues with that, though. If a kid says, well, I want to learn about whatever topic, and it's really not something of benefit at their age or something they might need in the future, then maybe a lot of education doesn't happen. A lot of learning doesn't take place. And so, with this philosophy, learning is self guided and it's self paced. And again, the curriculum is led by the child's curiosity rather than set by teachers. Now, from a teacher standpoint, here's the problem that I have with this. If the student decides that they want to learn about XYZ, again, you can fill in some topics. But as a math teacher, I'm supposed to teach them a set of curriculum. Well, it's hard to make that romanticism view fit with what I want, what the student needs to learn to be able to be successful in their next class. And so, if you let the child guide everything, then that can kind of be a problem because the kid doesn't know what they need to know. And so you kind of get into that epistemology we talked about in the previous video about knowing what you know and what you don't know. Well, a lot of times, especially at the elementary level, they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they need to, what they need to be learning about. And so, because of that, this can be quite a problem. Now, it can be really good if you say, okay, here's the topic we're going to cover, and I know that little Johnny is really interested in this topic, and it relates to this content that I need to teach. Well, then I may try to pull in some of those things that little Johnny's interested in to keep his attention. So there is some of that happens in this that is really good. But when you turn it over basically to the kid and say, okay, here's your, here's what what do you want to learn? We're going to let you kind of lead us. Well, then that's not a good situation to be in as a teacher. When I was in, I don't know, first, second grade, something like that, I went to school in Tupelo. My family lived there until I was in the fourth grade and moved to Fulton. Well, when I was in one of those earlier grades, going to a school in Tupelo, there was one year where they didn't give grades. And you may think, well, that's crazy. How do they know who did well and who didn't? A lot of it, and again, I'm hearing this sort of from my parents' perspective, but my mom was an educator, so I kind of trust what all she said here. Basically, it was, well, we're just going to let the kids decide what they want to learn. And we're not going to give grades because some kids may want to learn about one topic and other kids may want to learn about another topic, and so we're not going to give grades this year. Now, that seems a little extreme from this romanticism viewpoint. There, again, I see benefits of using this, but it can also be to the point where there is no organization. It can be really, really chaotic, for lack of a better term, when the student is strictly leading what's being done in the classroom. It also makes it hard for the teacher because if the teacher takes this mindset and little Johnny says, well, I want to learn about sharks. Okay, I'm teaching math. How am I going to incorporate sharks into my math class? Well, now I got to go study about sharks and somehow try to make that fit my topic. Well, if I can say, okay, you're going to learn this today, whatever the topic is, and I know that little Johnny is interested in sharks. If I can find a way to tie sharks in, well, then I may try to do that. But I'm still leading where the content goes. And so, again, I have some concerns about this method, or about this philosophy, if that's the only philosophy. Now, if it's a mixture of others, then I definitely see some positives there. But I do see potential issues, and I've seen that from a first-hand experience before. And then, where my personal view kind of falls is in the progressivism. This view, or this philosophy, and by the way, your philosophy may be one of these others. It may not be the same as mine, and that is completely fine. Okay? So if you go, well, I don't really think education works that well from a progressive mindset, that's fine. You don't have to. Because every teacher is going to be different. That's part of the reason why when you go interview for a job, they ask you to write your philosophy of education, because they kind of want to know, where do you fall? Are you very subject centered? Are you very student centered? Are you kind of a mixture of both? In my opinion, having a mixture of both is good, because maybe you're willing to do some things kind of outside the box, but you're not, you're not so free and just, laid back with the curriculum that you aren't focused on what you need to teach. And so as an administrator, that's good to know. And so when you go for that job interview, they're going to ask you for your philosophy of education. There's not a wrong answer. You tell what you think, how you feel like education should go. And so where my philosophy falls is kind of in this progressivism, with some leanings in some of the other philosophies too, but primarily progressivism. And so this philosophy is going to view nature as ever changing. Things are changing around us constantly. We can see that with technology. We know that I tell my students all the time in my math classes that a job that you get in 5 years may not be a job that exists today. So I cannot necessarily prepare you for go be this, do this for your career. Now, in an education class, it's a little easier, right? But in a math class, I can't necessarily say, well, if you're going to be this job, and just this job, here's what you got to know. Because there may be new jobs created in 2 or 3 years that my students are getting, and they can't rely on the fact that I just taught them how to do, whatever skills for a specific job. And so this philosophy is going to view nature as ever changing. Knowledge must be constantly redefined and rediscovered to keep up with constant change in the world. So here's how I use this, try to use this, and I don't do it as much at the college level as I did when I taught high school, but I like to give students problems that I haven't taught before and let them see if they can figure it out. Because if they can figure out their own method of getting an answer, and then I go teach it to them, well, then when I teach it, it makes sense. They say, oh, yes, so I did this, and I could have done this instead, and that could have got me to the right answer. Or maybe I did it this way, and Mr. Cox, is this the same thing, or is this accurate? And I can say yes or no, or, absolutely, that's a new way I hadn't thought about before. And so there is some discovery when you have that kind of investment into what you're learning, then all of a sudden it's really, you really have some buy-in from students. And so this method and this philosophy is still somewhat student-centered. It is focused on the student and making sure they learn. This philosophy looks at the purpose of education as being to learn, to solve problems, and discover knowledge. Again, because I teach math, this problem-solving aspect really fits with what I do. And so, again, this kind of fits with my subject, and then also my beliefs in how education should go. The curriculum is based on problems to solve, either created by the teacher or discovered by the student. That's what I was just talking about. I oftentimes will give problem sets, or used to give problem sets all the time to my students, and some of those were problems I had never taught before, but I wanted them to problem solve, think about what they knew, and use that to try to find the solution. And so, again, a lot of it is based in building problem solving skills. And then schools should be democratic, to provide practice for participation in democratic government. So this does, and this is kind of where I venture off a little bit from it, this philosophy does allow for students to have a major say in what happens at the school. And that can be a good thing. The students definitely need to have a voice. However, they don't need to be what makes the final decision. Okay, so that can be a problem. I really think about this philosophy as being a very well-rounded philosophy, where You appreciate the fact that things are changing and you want students to continue to do well in class, but to kind of discover some things and try different teaching methods and all of that, versus the romanticism that's just like, yeah, whatever you want to teach, or the essentialism that says, hey, we've got to teach this, 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 and this. And the student has no say, where in the romanticism, the student has all the say. I feel like this is kind of a well-rounded philosophy. Again, this is the philosophy that I typically kind of gravitate toward. Now, I do see value in the others. I absolutely believe that there is a need for students to learn how to read and write and do basic math, just like the essentialism do. Okay, so don't get me wrong. I do definitely think there's a need for that. But I think those things can be taught in a way that you can incorporate other things besides strictly lecturing and working problems all the time, or saying, okay, read this, read this, read this, read this. I think you can make it more attractive to the student, where you get more buy-in from the student. And again, we're talking high school level, right? Elementary level, junior high level. Some of this is different at the college level. Now, where I can, I still like to do some of these things. But my time is so crunched at the college level, I've basically got to teach whatever my curriculum says, and that's about it. And so I don't have the luxury of being able to take the time that I really need to go in and do some of these things I'd like to do. And so, I think it's important, as you look at these philosophies and figure out where you fall, you realize that it's okay to be in any of these, right? It's okay to be in any of these philosophies, and it's okay to have a mix of all of them. That is perfectly fine. And I think when you take the survey that I'm going to post in Canvas, I think when you take that, you're going to really probably agree with wherever you fall, because the questions are asked in such a way that whichever one you fall in is pretty accurate. Most every semester when I do this, students say, yeah, I was, most of my points came in this philosophy and it said I was whatever. And I said, well, what do you think about that? And most of the time they say, yeah, I agree with that. Again, I do think there's value in all of these. I think there's a lot of good things to be learned from those great classic literature pieces that the essentialism and the perennialism believe are so vital to education. Definitely some good things you can learn there. I think that, again, using the essentialism philosophy and making sure students know basic arithmetic and how to read and write, those are all very basic things that students need. But I think there can be a mixture. And so for me personally, and I can't wait to hear what you think, I do think there's a need for a little bit of all of these. And so as you begin thinking about your philosophy of education, go to the book, read the first part of chapter 9 through page, I would go through page